Hello and welcome back. I'm your host, Mitch Simpkins, and this is Wins for Widows, where you get practical guidance from the mouth of professionals who are united in helping you get back on your feet after experiencing the loss of a loved one. Together, we'll uncover the rooted question that you might be asking yourself: what now? And what should I do next? Today, I'm joined by Christian Hibinski. Excited to have him on. We had a great conversation before. He is a real estate and a government law attorney based in New Jersey with professional experience spanning private practice and public service. He currently serves as the managing attorney of Hibinski Law. During our recent call, Christian shared that he frequently assists widows and older clients in addressing real property matters, such as selling and downsizing homes, amending operating agreements for jointly owned businesses, and guiding clients through the legal process when they wish to leave or maintain rental properties. We talked about the emotional and practical aspects that often accompany such decisions, especially when family dynamics or business property are involved. So today we're really going to focus a lot on those pieces, bringing his expertise into that. Christian, welcome. Thank you for taking some time out of your schedule to be with us today.
Absolutely, Mitch. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you. What else did I miss? Anything else you want to add to that bio?
No, I think you nailed it, Mitch. And it's a intro. Still does me justice, but I'm looking forward to talking with you more about that.
Yeah, for sure. No, I enjoyed our prior conversation. It's cool because this is kind of a different space that I've been with some of the other attorneys on the podcast thus far. And so, but still a big concern, like real property. What do you do with it? And I know that's your expertise, and I'm excited to drill in. And I think our listeners are going to gain a lot of knowledge from your experience. So thank you. All right. So let's dig into some of the questions. What are the first steps that a widow should consider when deciding whether to keep, sell, or downsize her home after her spouse passes? And what pitfalls have you seen clients encounter in this space?
Yeah, so I think the first step might not be what you expect it to be.
Okay.
What I would say the first step is a self-reflection and an analysis of your current emotional state and your current financial well-being.
Well,
I think it's a kind of a two-pronged self-analysis when that happens to see where you are in both of those assets of your life. And then once you make that determination, you can kind of start deciding whether to keep, whether to sell, whether to downsize after you kind of personalize the experience for yourself, so to speak.
good. Love that. Love that.
In terms of, maybe the emotional side, are you really attached to the property? Do you want to let it go even if you can't afford it, or vice versa? Sometimes it's very painful to leave a family home, a home that you have grown and built with someone, even if downsizing may be the more financially prudent option. And once you make that kind of emotional decision, I think the financial point is also very important. And as a first step, I would probably review all of the finances coming in. Was the spouse, bringing in a pension? Do they have a retirement fund? Do they have a life insurance policy? What's left after all the expenses after the funeral? How much is the income ratio that the deceased spouse is bringing in compared to what you have now? Did they have bringing in 70%, 80%, 90% of the funds, and you were only contributing 10, 20, 30%? Was it a 50-50 split? Or were you contributing, most of the funds, and you think that might be still self-sustainable even without their assistance in their funds coming in? So I think evaluating the financial aspect is important, and it has to be done in conjunction with the emotional side too, because that'll help you decide whether you want to keep, sell, downsize, your property. And some pitfalls, to the latter part of your question.
Yeah.
You'd have to really consider, are you able to handle all of the maintenance without the assistance? Some people are very attached to their property and they don't want to let it go, even if they can't afford it, they can't maintain it. They have no other income to stay in it, to pay the taxes. And I've seen it where people these widows, they get very attached, and it's just unaffordable at the end of the day to really maintain and keep the property, as
Interesting.
unfortunate as that may be.
Yeah,
So
I
I would say
love
that.
that you're mixing kind of that emotional and real side together because it's both have to be considered, right? And it's hard to. Mm.
Absolutely. That's why I think it's a first step. It's really deciding where you are in your mental space and where you want to go, and do you have the funds to make what needs to happen to where you're still happy enough, and you're still have your head above water with the finances.
Yeah.
Because it's really I really believe it's a two-pronged thing. Once when somebody dies, where is your headspace and what do the finances look like?
Yeah, no, and I like that you bring out the cost of maintaining that and the ability to maintain that because it takes a lot of effort to manage a home. And if you don't have a
Absolutely.
good person, a good go-to fix it person that can come and help you and can afford some of that, it may not be reasonable to continue in your home. Is that kind of one of the thoughts that you
Yeah,
had?
that's absolutely fair, and it's not just about the bills and things like that. It's let's say you needed your former spouse used to just mow the lawn, and now you don't have somebody to come mow the lawn, or
Yeah,
they were a handyman around the house, and now there's no one to fix the miscellaneous things that break around the house.
yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily have to all be the financial side, but like that maintenance portion comes in too, because those little things add up.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, I'm losing my 17-year-old next year. He's leaving the house, and he's my lawnmower. So,
Man,
so I'm going to be in that boat, Chris.
maybe get a ride on mower.
That's a good idea. Or another youngster in the neighborhood to come.
Yeah,
To come and get.
absolutely. I'm sure some kids would like the extra cash.
There's got to be somebody. There's got to
Got
be
to be
somebody.
somebody.
So, what pitfalls have you seen? Have you seen people do things that you're like, oh, we probably should have done that? That probably wasn't the best alternative.
Yeah, aside from being attached to the property for too long, like I talked about as a pitfall, where they can't afford those maintenance and bills, and are refusing to downsize and
Mm,
living essentially above their means now without the other
interesting.
person.
Yeah.
I've seen
Mm,
the exact opposite, like the other swing of the pendulum, so to speak,
mm,
where people get very emotional, or they inherit a large sum of money from the estate of the deceased spouse, and they expand. They
mm,
buy property that is too big,
mm,
and
mm,
they've never been in a situation
mm.
where they've had to maintain a property of this size, and things can spiral out of control a little bit with that when you are maintaining something that you're not used to that's too big. Now sometimes they use it as a coping mechanism, or they feel like they just need to get out of the old place, and sometimes it gets too big. So I think the other side of the spectrum is another pitfall.
Yeah.
Either, aside from holding on to it, expanding too big with maybe funds that you would have came into.
Interesting. So do you kind of give them an idea to say, like, don't do anything for X amount of time?
I think that's a very personal time frame. I guess all I would say is when you feel like you're in a clear headspace to start making some of these decisions, and that you are at a point where you think you understand the finances enough to make one of those decisions, then you can start deciding what you want to do when it comes to your specific property.
Yeah. No, I think that's great advice. I mean, you hear like a year, don't do anything within the first year, but I guess if someone like within that first year, if the changes in finances are going to drain you within
Sure.
that
If the
first
if
year,
the
like,
estate settles, and you're able to and your life insurance cashes out and everything is like taken care of, I would say wait till maybe at minimum wait till maybe some of the legal stuff gets situated before. But while that's going on, you can almost simultaneously be kind of coping with that emotional side as well. While the estate's getting probated, while the insurance is getting paid out, while all that stuff has happened, you can start thinking about what you want to do after all that is finished. So maybe use that as a benchmark, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a benchmark if you have other funds or means or goals. It's
yeah.
just maybe safer to try to wait till everything's kind of concluded before making another life decision.
No, I love that. I interviewed Kathleen Reel yesterday. She's part of our podcast. She's done a ton of research, was a widow herself, and she talks about 3 stages of widowhood. One is grief, where you're just numb and you're just trying to get through every minute. One is growth, where you're kind of ready for the next step. And then the other one is really grace around transformation. And so, I love this as a way to kind of think like, where am I in my headspace? Where am I at in terms of my progress? And definitely in that grief stage, like, don't make big decisions. Give it some time. Let the numbness wear off, and kind of
I would agree.
let kind of the emotional piece of it, the grief piece of it, take a little more of a back seat, and think about. And to your point, let some of the, especially if there's a probate or a larger estate, because there's a lot of work that has to be done in
Absolutely.
a lot of building, family trusts and marital trusts, and who knows what else based on the size of the estate, right? There's a lot of work in
Absolutely.
that happens. So no, I love that advice. Excellent. I love the mixing the two, emotional and the practical side. Let's shift a little bit and talk about business ownership or joint ownership. So can you explain the unique issues that come up when a widow jointly owns real estate, whether it's a rental business or a second home or an investment property, and how can she best protect herself if she chooses to keep or restructure those assets? What have you seen there? What advice do you have?
Sure. So I'm not a legal expert in every state, generally speaking, unless there's some deed, trust, instrument to the contrary. The surviving widow would just kind of automatically inherit the property after the spouse becomes deceased. Some of the things that are important are maybe changing the title, updating the insurance, updating the utility and tax records with the government. If you're paying like water or property taxes, you want to make sure that the government has your updated records with just your name on it or anyone you want to bring on it, and advise them that the spouse has passed.
Mm,
There may be some adjustments they might make based on that. So like those are a couple very important things. I'm not an elder law attorney either, but there is something called it's a step up in basis, which is kind of like a tax provision that allows some widows to adjust their costs based on their deceased spouse's assets. So like any of those items like that we talked about, or like maybe like some stocks and bonds that their
yeah,
spouse might have had,
yeah, they get a nice step up.
those are things that could be adjusted
Yeah, yeah.
as part of that joint ownership after somebody passes.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I know a couple states out here, like Utah and Nevada, have very different rules around step up. Nevada allows it for 50% step up when one of the spouses die. Utah said nada, you only get it when both spouses die. So,
Yeah,
but
see, every
something,
state's different, but they
and
do exist in some form around the country.
yes, yes, yes. So you have to look at your specific state and kind of know what that rule
Absolutely.
is. Yeah, thank you for bringing that out.
Yeah, and then if there are to just continue off the question, you mentioned about restructuring the assets. If you're a joint property holder and you're on these deeds, these operating agreements, if it's just you and the spouse, it's more easily
Yeah.
amendable. Just clarify, because and then you're gonna want to update these operating agreements. Say like if you were a landlord, or if you were have other members besides just you and your spouse, like maybe it was me and you, that in addition to the couple.
Mm,
If there is options in these agreements, other partners may want the option to buy out the deceased portion share,
interesting.
or maybe the widow would want to sell her portions to the surviving members of
Mm,
any of these joint property ventures. So it would be really important to take a look at any partnership agreements, any operating agreements, any deeds that actually might name other people as persons of interest, to make sure they're contacted, and seeing what they want to do with the property in terms of restructuring, because they do have rights if they.
yeah, for sure. Any advice pre widowhood, pre one of the two partners becomes deceased? Any advice there for them to say, like, do this before it becomes really difficult when one of you is gone?
Yeah, take a look at any existing agreements, update them to have contingency plans in them should someone pass. Those are good to have in place, even from like not even just an estate planning perspective, from a business perspective too. You want to make sure everybody knows what's going to happen with this piece of property that's being used as a business.
Yeah.
It should that happen. And if you, maybe less formatting wise, but like in terms of like, if you know that, maybe say your spouse is very sick and there's, this is like a prolonged process. And if you have that information from doctors and like there is an end in the near future, I would recommend advising anybody that has a property interest in your real estate that, hey, this is what's likely on the horizon. Give them a heads up so nobody's shocked and nobody's scrambling and fighting
Great,
for interest when
great advice.
things do happen.
Great advice.
So
Yeah,
if
great.
you know, I firmly believe if you know something, it's always best to prep everybody in advance if possible, so there are less surprises and less scrambling
Yeah.
when things come to fruition.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, obviously, if that is the case where one of the spouses is really not doing well, there's a lot of pressure and a lot of things going on. And I think that would probably be the biggest reason why people wouldn't, or it just sits and they just think, yeah, I'll just let it happen when it's over. But one of the things I always say to people is like, when one of you's gone, your ability to do things just got much more difficult. And I know you don't
Absolutely.
want to deal with it now, but when one of you's gone, those options that you could have used or done before, they're gone, and you get to deal with what's there. So yeah, that's
Absolutely. If you
definitely
can
good.
try to address it before that grief and that strain comes on you, at least so there's a plan in place in theory with any business assets and things like that.
Mhm.
Definitely recommended to try to
Get
warn
her
in
done.
advance, get those agreements updated, have
Yeah, for sure.
contingency plans in place. Because like you mentioned, it's better to have it in place and maybe not need it than trying to deal with it when there's that emotional stress at the end of the other
For
side.
sure. No, good point. Yeah, bringing the stress in on top of that is it's a double whammy. So, what about for people who want to terminate a lease or they just don't want to be a landlord anymore? And so, outside of kind of traditional estate planning, what legal help or what things should they seek or do if they just want to be done with it?
Yeah. So every state does have different landlord tenant laws. Some states are more pro landlord, some states are more pro tenant, some states are just in the middle somewhere and they have their unique ways about how to terminate tenancies. So I guess my first step would be, depending on what state you live on, go contact a landlord tenant attorney in that state and then speak with them about what you want to do with the property. If you are a landlord and you are renting to a tenant and you just want to kind of
Yeah.
end that tenancy or sell the property, there are a couple ways to go about it. Generally speaking, like in New Jersey, you can sell the property with the tenant and the buyer has to take subject to the tenant's existing lease. So
Okay.
if you just
Carries
want
over.
to sell the property and you can find the buyer that just takes over the tenants, fantastic.
Okay.
Sometimes there's specific provisions statewide, and there's another instance in New Jersey where you're allowed to sell the property to a prospective buyer and request that it be vacant if the owner intends to personally live there and it's less than a certain number of units. So if you provide proper notice to them, so
Mm,
you can require the property be delivered vacant upon
mm,
sale to the new owner if all the notices are met and the statutes met and your
mm.
contract of sale actually calls for it.
Okay.
Every state's a little
Yeah.
different on
Okay.
whether or not you can sell
Yeah.
a property and require it to be vacant. But
Yeah.
like in my practice, that is an option, at least in New Jersey. And aside from, purchasing with tenants and making the purchase contingent on the tenant not being there, there's always the tried and true voluntary vacate. You can advise your tenants, hey, I
Selling
don't want to
and
be the landlord anymore.
yeah.
If
Yeah.
you want to do kind of like a cash for keys situation where I buy you out of your lease and you can go find somewhere else, are you okay? Are you okay reporting to a new landlord? Like, and do you want to stay? Are you open to kind of what we like to call a surrender agreement or a lease termination agreement where, we both the landlord talks to the tenant and they kind of agree on a plan to exit the property, maybe an adjustment on rent, an earlier move out date than the lease end, things like that could all be done voluntarily and between the two parties. You don't
I
necessarily
see.
have to get the court involved unless there's an eviction, so to speak.
Or a conflict between the two of them.
if you can talk with them and, explain the situation, and that's always an option. So I would say that the main two things to your question are either trying to sell the property for somebody to take it over, or trying to work with them and transition the tenant out if they want to get out.
Okay. Okay. So just real quick around that. So what typically trumps? Is it the agreement that you have or the state laws? Like
Yeah, I
say
mean,
you're just like, I'm out, I'm done, and I want you out because I'm selling, and they don't want to have, like, what trumps?
yeah, sure. So you can waive certain rights in any of your agreements, but your agreements can't necessarily be unconstitutional and violate state law. But you can waive certain things. If say like in a settlement agreement or a move out agreement, say you get a security deposit back at the end within your state's requisite amount of period. You can write in any agreement, I waive the security deposit. The landlord can keep it, or you can waive your rights to sue over it later and just either give it back in full or not question the deductions after it. You could tweak any kind of surrender agreement or personal, agreement that you make with each other. There's a certain level of flexibility to that. And so, like, if you're okay with it and the other side's okay with it, generally speaking, the law is, if there's two consenting individuals have a, disagreement, the court, if there's an issue about it, will likely just enforce whatever you guys agreed to,
Okay.
because there's a certain deference that the parties know better than, the state would necessarily about what they wanted to happen out of this.
Hmm. So first priority would be go to the tenant. Say, hey, look,
Absolutely.
I'm thinking about this. Let's work some stuff out. I can make some
That's
concession. I know I'm
always my recommendation.
inconveniencing you. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because that can be difficult and just another hassle,
It
right?
can
To
be.
have to deal with right off. So speaking of challenges, sometimes family dynamics play into like a family home, leaving a family home, or by involving children in specific property decisions, and that can really impact the widow's estate decisions. So if you have any specific experiences you've seen, and what advice do you have for managing through family dynamics that can be even more difficult than tenant dynamics?
Yeah, and I would say that's more personal than legal a lot of the time.
Mm,
Because unless there's some document to the contrary, it's really going to be the widow's decision what they want to do at the end of the day as the surviving spouse with the immediate interest in the property.
yeah,
She can take into account the wants and needs of the family
yeah,
or the adult children.
yeah,
Absolutely. That
yeah.
is something that I would probably even recommend, doing before taking any action. But there's no really legal right of these other family
To-
members or children unless there's some specific exception or instrument that allows them a right.
yeah,
So I guess the main point would be trying to keep in mind that they, as the surviving spouse, have a significant amount of autonomy at the end of the day about what to do with the property,
yeah,
and try to avoid being too pressured from
yeah,
these third parties, even if they
yeah,
are your family,
yeah.
and even if they are the adult children.
Realizing, hey, look, I've got the final decision here. Thanks for your
Yeah,
input. Have you ever seen that in a real challenge where you've just seen the widow just get totally pressured and
absolutely. It's more common than you think because, especially when there's, adult children that are significantly involved, and, the widow's in a vulnerable place,
yeah,
and, she
yeah,
wants to do right by her children. And there's become some conflicting decisions. But, one of the things I like to remind, them at the end of the day is, look,
you're in charge.
you're in charge still.
Yep.
Yeah, you're alive. This is still your property unless you want it. But if you want to do something with it, maybe help your children or, fine, with them, then fair enough. Take that into consideration. Just don't forget that unless there's something to the contrary, these calls are yours right now.
Yours. That's good. That's good. No, that and I'm sure that she appreciates having somebody in her court to be like, yeah, okay, because yeah, I know, and all the best meaning children sometimes they put a lot of pressure where they don't really have the right to do, but they do because they love and want to give it, but it's a lot of challenge with a lot of other things on top of it. So what about younger widows, like not necessarily in retirement? So for widows who perhaps have minor children or have lost a partner at a younger age, what unique property or legal issues should they be watching out for? And what advice do you have for that particular segment of the widow?
Sure, sure. So a lot of the same rights are going to apply regardless of the age in terms of like your legal right. But when there's a younger couple, they're just by the nature of them being younger, there's probably less assets involved
Mm,
at the end of the day.
mm,
If you're younger, there's a greater likelihood, a widow may want another person involved in their life, maybe romantically at some point that, is a different consideration than perhaps an older widow.
mm,
If that's the case,
mm,
it's important to establish what was owned prior to any eventual marriage or long-term relationship to distinguish it from what might become marital property in a different relationship down the road. And I think that's more common when there's a younger widow, that there's just a higher likelihood that there's going to be another person involved in their
mhm.
life at some point.
Yeah.
So let's just take, for example, say a widow inherits a house, but the new spouse may have inheritance rights to the old property, the old marital property, if it's not clarified. So it's going to be important to make sure all your documents, maybe even a prenuptial agreement, you can bring in to say like, hey, I had this house that was mine from this
Mhm.
prior marriage. I'm the only one on the deed right now, so it's mine. You don't have any rights in it right now, but like if we do get married, maybe you'll have some inheritance rights if I pass or something like that. So I think it's important to kind of draw that line between what was owned before and what's owned now to make sure they don't get blurred if a younger widow's kind of trying to bring in a new person to the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, so is that new trusts that you build? Do you build like a trust and have the trust own the property so that it segments it pretty quickly? Just
You
one
could
of the
do it a
options.
bunch of different ways up depending on what the client wants to do. That's a really a legal strategy that's going to depend on, what they want to do in their particular interests.
Or just
Um,
retitling it in a certain way, having
yeah,
the
you
deed
can read.
the deed title at a certain
Yeah,
kind of.
sure, sure. And I guess one more, unique situation I would say for younger widows in general is, just a lot of younger people are renting property. They don't really own property. A lot of the times, it takes a while to get to a stage where you own property. Aside from the ownership aspects of the property, there's people in rental situations as well. And I think that's going to be more common with younger people than older people who've had a chance to, build their real estate portfolio and things like that as they got into life.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're younger and you're renting, there's a different set of, issues you might have to deal with. You might have to figure out how to, get out of the lease or amend the lease or, talk to your landlord if you want to bring in that new person to live with you
Mm,
as an additional leaseholder or occupant on the lease
yeah. It's awesome.
to allow them to, legally reside with you if you want to stay in that rental property.
Yeah.
So like there's just a different set of rental
Challenge.
issues if that's where you are in your life versus you actually own the property. So, which I think is just more likely if you're going to be in if you're younger in
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. No, I love, yeah. And at that stage, you're really not thinking about, okay, what happens when I die? And if I die before you do, a lot of times in the older clients, I see them say, if it's a new marriage, like, you're good to stay in this house until, you die,
Right.
and not to have it go directly to the kids. That's a common practice I've seen. Is that kind of what you see kind of in
I would say that's
older
a fairly
population?
common.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Which is graceful. Yeah, it's very nice. At least they got a place to stay, especially if the other one came in with less assets and doesn't have a
absolutely.
way to cover themselves. No, these are great. These are great, great advice. And yeah, I mean, again, it's a place that is a lot of stress, but maybe not a lot of guidance on. So very, very helpful. Anything else, Christian, before we close it out? Anything else that you think we just got to know, and these widows
I
need to
think we talked
need to
a
prepare
lot
for?
about some of the main, issues that could affect real property in this situation. I think it was a
Yeah.
very
Well,
good
that's
and
good.
informative discussion, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk with them those issues about you
Well,
with you, Mitch.
for sure. No, I appreciate your knowledge, your background, your experience. Very helpful. A very nice rounding to this podcast and the information that we're supplying. So thanks again, Christian, for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Mitch. You too.
Thank you.